All right, the new predictive history is out. Let's see what's going on.
Today, I want to discuss how this war will end. I cannot predict when this war will end, but I want to make certain predictions about how this war will end, okay? So to first understand how the war is going, let's look at some video clips.
We hit Qatar, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Bahrain, Kuwait. Nobody expected that. We were shocked. And the other one, they fought back. They could have yielded. But think of it, if we weren't around, they had tremendous power. They had thousands of missiles, most of which we've terminated. They had thousands of drones. They were making drones and missiles all over the place. We've knocked out most of those factories. So they hit.
See, this is my problem with the White House right now. It's like they're all over the place. Were they really not prepared for this strike? Were they really not prepared for this invasion? They've been talking for 2 weeks now about Karg Island and how they're going to invade Karg Island. For what purpose? Are we launching drones from there? Are we launching missiles from there? Is that going to be like a forward operating base? Seems like a place to get shot. I mean, of course they're going to be willing to bomb that island. They're going to be willing to bomb the entire Middle East because they're in survival mode. This goes back to what I'm saying in my last episode. Like, we're not taking this war seriously enough, and we're not approaching it as a real war. They're approaching it as like a police action, like Bosnia. That's not going to fly here. These people are, as Professor Jiang put it, in an existential war against us for their own survival. We have to approach this war from that basis. And to say, oh, we never saw this coming, we never saw that they were going to bomb all the refineries in OPEC, that's bullshit. Either they're lying, which I think that's the case here, they're just lying about it to save face with their allies, or they really went in there incompetently with their pants down. But I don't believe that. I think they knew what they were doing, and that really getting the refineries bombed and driving up the price of oil was part of their intention.
So what he's saying here is, we went in expecting to hit them, kill their leadership, and then they would surrender. We didn't expect them to fight back. We didn't expect them to close the Strait of Hormuz. We didn't expect that they would hit Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, okay? So what he's saying is, we actually didn't have a plan going in. And we really didn't think our enemies would fight back. All right, so this is Donald Trump.
Preference is always peace. There does not need to be any more death and destruction. But if Iran fails to accept the reality of the current moment, if they fail to understand that they have been defeated militarily and will continue to be, President Trump will ensure they are hit harder than they have ever been hit before. President Trump does not bluff, and he is prepared to unleash hell.
Okay, so what is she this is Karen Levitt, and she's the press secretary for the White House. And what she's saying is, look, we've defeated these guys, but for whatever reason, the Iranians don't know that. That's the problem. The problem isn't us. We came in with the right strategy, we did everything right, but for whatever reason, the Iranians, being stupid, don't know they've been defeated. All right?
And that's the problem, right? They didn't go in there with the right strategy. They went in there with the wrong strategy. And they continue to waffle this invasion plan. And so they're declaring victory. They're declaring mission accomplished. They're looking like fools. They're not willing to use all the military resources at their disposal. They're indecisive over what military strategy to take. I've seen a lot of different proposals over the last 2 weeks, and only a few make sense. Karg Island without a land invasion doesn't make sense. They weren't ready. They're saying 3,000 army troops. I mean, it's almost like they want to send in 3,000 troops to get bombed on Karg Island. So we have our Gulf of Tonkin incident to constitute a larger invasion. That's ridiculous. It'd be better just to go in full force, cut the bullshit, don't sacrifice the troops because you're going to need them. Get Karg Island later, unless you plan on launching drones from it to strike the mainland. But if you don't, securing the Strait of Hormuz is a better strategy. Securing that little Gulf/Bay area where, there's a big Arab population that doesn't have a lot in common with the Persian population is smarter. But there's been some talk of that. The Saudis have proposed that, but I haven't heard anything from the DoD saying this is what we're going to do. Mainly the focus has been on bombing, putting the onus on Israel, trying to use force as a negotiation tool for immediate peace and an invasion of Karg Island. There's not going to be any peace with this regime.
Never in history has a modern military, Iran had a modern military, a modern navy, a modern air force, modern air defenses, leadership, massive bunker. Never has a modern military been so rapidly and historically obliterated, defeated from day one with overwhelming firepower. The air campaign that we've conducted, that Israel's conducted alongside us, was one for the history books, truly. And it's because we have a president of the United States that when he sends his warfighters out to fight, he unties their hands to actually go out and close with and destroy the enemy as viciously as possible from moment one. And that's why we see ourselves as part of this negotiation as well. We negotiate with bombs. You have a choice as we loiter over the top of Tehran, as the president talked about your future. The president has made it clear that you will not have a nuclear weapon. The War Department agrees. Our job is to ensure that. And so we're keeping our hand on that throttle as long as hard as it's necessary to ensure the interests of the United States of America are achieved.
Okay, so this is Secretary of War Peter Hegseth, and he represents the Pentagon, the military. And his attitude is, we're winning this war, we are kicking ass, and we don't have to negotiate because we're kicking ass. And we'll continue to do so. All right, so this is the attitude of the military. Now, the US media has been reporting that Donald Trump is seeking an off-ramp. He's seeking negotiations. And what Peter Hegseth says, no, let's negotiate with bombs, man.
I mean, he's right. You do need to negotiate with bombs right now because it's completely futile to bomb them a little bit and then be like, what now? You ready to talk? You ready for a deal? That's retarded. Okay, that's not going to work here. These people are ready for a prolonged conflict. Plus, there's active nuclear material on the ground that's going to have to be secured by an invasion force. And some of it's in some very hard to get to corners of this country, like Isfahan. Like that's like in the middle of the country. And a dirty bomb could easily be made out of that material. It's like 60% uranium, enriched uranium. It's almost weapons grade. You need to wake up to the reality that they need to go in hard, fast, and full force. Because right now, this whole like, oh, I'm going to bomb you, and then what now? Are you guys ready to talk? No, they're not going to talk. The new leader of the IRGC is like a super radical fundamentalist Islamist. He's not going to negotiate with us.
Plan across the administration and at Treasury, we unsanctioned Russian oil. We knew that there were about 130 million barrels on the water, and we created supply that is beyond the Straits of Hormuz. So we anticipated this. We knew that there could be a temporary, and I want to emphasize temporary, choke point there, and there was 130 million barrels of floating storage. In the coming days, we may unsanction the Iranian oil that's on the water. It's about 140 million barrels. So depending on how you count it, that's 10 days to 2 weeks of supply that the Iranians had been pushing out. That would have all gone to China. In essence, we will be using the Iranian barrels against the Iranians to keep the price down, for the next 10 or 14 days.
Okay, so this is the Secretary of the Treasury, Scott Bessent, okay? And he's responding to a problem, which is the Americans didn't expect that the Iranians would close off the Strait of Hormuz. And so this is affecting oil supply. And so the global economy could be disrupted or even destroyed if this lasts too long. So Scott Bessent says, we knew this was going to happen, and we have a really brilliant plan to destroy the Iranians once and for all. Our plan is this. We're going to let the Iranians sell their oil and make a lot of money. And then they'll be destroyed. Yeah. So the Americans basically unsanctioned Iranian oil, and because of that, the Iranians were able to make $14 billion just like that. The total Iranian military budget for 1 year is $10 billion. Okay? So this is American genius at work. They knew this was happen. They knew the Iranians wanted to destroy the global economy. So the Americans were like, well, let's make them rich so they can't destroy the global economy. We got them now.
So they're probably hoping that they can let them distribute the oil and then somehow sanction the bank transaction or shut off the smart system to keep them from getting paid. That may work, that may not. And look, the DoD has known for years, they've talked about for the last 20 years, about how Iran will close down the Strait of Hormuz in the incident of a conflict. But I think what they weren't prepared for was for a good portion of the world to give up its refining capacity and outsource it to China. Australia is a good example of that. They're not prepared for an oil shortage. A lot of these countries have like a month to 3 months worth of oil maximum. And what that's done is that's created upward price pressure on the commodities market for oil. And also you have some rampant speculation on the oil market as well. Like today I saw that there's investors effectively that are trying to price fix the market at a higher point to make the price for oil very expensive for China and profit off of the they call it the arbitrage. And so there's a lot of market manipulation happening right now, which the Republicans aren't going to police. In fact, Congress isn't going to police it. They're fucking useless. So, I'm not surprised that this is being fumbled. The ball is being terribly fumbled because our corrupt and worthless leaders are trying to figure out how to profit off of every minute of this conflict. The other day we just saw Trump was like, we have a deal. And then, the stock market went up for like a day, and that allowed all of Trump's buddies to offload their positions and go long on oil. And so, there's a lot of corruption going on and a lot of doublespeak and bullshit.
And yet Iran remains a threat to trade, a threat to the Straits of Hormuz. Then I would argue that we could have years of above $100, closer to $150 oil.
What happens to the global economy if that happens? How do we see it?
We'll have global recession.
So this is Larry Fink, and he's head of a company called BlackRock, which is the largest asset manager in the world. They control trillions and trillions of dollars. And what he's saying, he's being interviewed by the BBC. What he's saying is, we can't stop this war now, because if we stop this war now, that means that the price of oil will be too high for many, many years. The Iranians will control the Strait of Hormuz, and therefore we must fight this war to the end. What he doesn't address is, well, if you didn't start this war in the first place, you wouldn't have this problem, because the Iranians would have no pretext to close off the Strait of Hormuz, and the global economy would have been fine. But what he's saying is like, oh, don't worry about that. The problem is the war has started, and therefore we must fight to the end. Okay?
Because this was their intention. Look, Larry Fink is the biggest piece of shit. And we all know it, right? BlackRock is an evil corporation. Larry Fink's an evil man. He was appointed the new head of the World Economic Forum. I refuse to believe that this conflict wasn't premeditated because, like I said, the policy for a new American century has been talking about this conflict for 25 years. We just saw the other week Condoleezza Rice got invited to the White House. All of the neocons are circling around Trump. You have Larry Fink basically saying, if Iran isn't overthrown, that Wall Street plans on punishing the U.S. public and the world with decades of higher oil prices as a hostage situation. Because what they're saying is, well, we have to price in risk for the Persian Gulf now. But that risk has always been there. It's not the first time Iran's interdicted a oil shipment or threatened a tanker or threatened a naval vessel in the Persian Gulf. This is nothing new. What they did was they incited Iran to bomb the GCC's oil assets so that they could profit off of being long on oil. And then now, as we're seeing in all these countries, they're bringing back all the COVID rules on the basis of oil shortages. Hey, we don't have the energy to run this factory or allow people to commute to work or allow them to take a vacation to Florida. No, everybody's got to stay home, locked down, immobile, and we're going to make the price of gas so high that they can't afford to move, and that only the rich are going to be able to move around like it's feudal Europe all over again, just like Professor Yang pointed out. It's not, oh, we never should have done this. No, it's you prosecute the war that I'm demanding, or we're going to punish you with a global depression. And this reminds me of Warren Buffett's phone call to the Federal Reserve back in 2008. If you don't bail out the banks that I own, I'm going to sell off everything and cause a depression. So it's once again the world of international finance holding the United States and the international community hostage. And our government leaders are so corrupt, they're just not doing anything about it. They're just allowing it.
Americans are losing this war. And the main reason is the problem of hubris. And so I want to examine closely what this means strategically, what this means on the battlefield, okay? So war is fought across 4 dimensions, all right? There is the narrative dimension, meaning global opinion, how history will perceive this war. There is the political dimension, meaning how your allies perceive this war, how your domestic base perceive this war. There's the economic, and then there's the military. If we examine this war closely, the Iranians are fighting a very different war from the Americans. What the Americans are doing is basically they are shifting the narrative, political sphere, and economic sphere to fit their economic strategy, okay? Their economic strategy is decapitation, which forces surrender, right? So what they want to do is they want to not destroy the Iranian leadership, destroy the Iranian economy to force a surrender, in which case the Americans can dictate terms.
And this is the same strategy they pursued in the Bosnian wars and the Balkan wars. Just bomb them until they accede to demands. And that's not going to happen here.
That is their strategy, and that's about it. And they are forcing the narrative space, the political space, and the economic space to conform to the military strategy, meaning that they expect the allies, NATO, they expect the media, they expect the economy to support their strategy. So
none of which is happening. Our allies have abandoned us, right? The UK, Europe, France, all of them are shirking from their responsibilities. You know, the UK is so heavily influenced by China under Starmer at this point. They're going to do nothing politically at home. There's no appetite for it. They just increased the draft age to 42 so they could kill off the millennials. No one's happy about that, especially nobody wants to fight a war for pedophiles. I'm just going to say it like that. Everybody just saw the Epstein files, and no one's motivated to fight for either Israel or this government. And then economically, the government is doing nothing about the fact that there's thousands of layoffs. People are not making good money. You know, they're like, oh, you know, unemployment, look at the unemployment rate. It's mostly part-time, low-wage jobs. People who have degrees are out of jobs because of the bullshit AI revolution, which is a facade anyways. And there's just like no strong political will to support this war from the get-go because the country's not doing well already. The tariffs have not done well for us. The taxes have not done well for us. There's been no justice, which was what, you know, a lot of people voted Trump in for, was to deliver justice for a lot of the wrongs that happened under the Biden administration. None of that has come to fruition. If anything, the FBI has engaged in covering it up. And it's just the people aren't feeling it. We're feeling betrayed, to be honest with you. And for Trump to team up with the neocons, a lot of people voted for Trump on the basis that he was not supposed to be the neocons and that he was going to go against the neocon neoliberal complex. And effectively, he sold out Maha, he sold out RFK. I just saw today that, you know, the new vaccine committee, a lot of the appointees are stepping down because they're getting backstabbed by the White House. It's kind of like Hitler, where you're like, oh, I'm going to do all these alliances and have all these friends that have public support. And then once I'm chancellor, I'm just going to have them all executed and removed. That's what's happening right now. And with the Epstein thing going on in the background, the public is just spiritually disgusted with the U.S. government. So they don't want to support the U.S. government. People don't want to pay taxes. They don't want to help the military. And what the government's doing is they're working with the oligarchs to basically push everybody into unemployment and in poverty so that they have no choice but to join the military and fight this war. But it's not going to work like it did in the 30s. People have the internet. We have information. We have Professor Yang. We can see through this bullshit. So it's not going to happen the way it happened before. And it completely goes against what our country was founded for and what the Constitution stands for.
So, for example, in the political space, Donald Trump has ordered NATO to come and open up the Strait of Hormuz, okay? And also, Donald Trump refuses to acknowledge the fact that this war is very unpopular back in America. In the economic space, what the Americans are trying to do is keep the price of oil low so that it does not disrupt the global economy. And they do that, of course, by unsanctioning Russian and Iranian oil, which benefits the Russian and Iranian economies, okay? And in a narrative space, they're basically trying to tell the media to follow the party line. Donald Trump has threatened journalists that if you do not report this war is going well, then I might put you in prison. All right? So this is the American strategy, forcing the narrative, political, and economic spheres to...
It's an unjust war. And that's going to cause a lot of fracturing. I mean, I support the troops. I want the United States to win this conflict. I think we should go in there with overwhelming force. We should just hit them hard with our ballistic missile systems and stop fucking around. And we should just let our military just wipe them out and win. But I already know that our elites are going to hamstring our military. And that's why a lot of people don't want to join up right now, because they know it's going to be like Vietnam all over again, where it's going to be about profit for a few at the expense of the lives of many.
Form to the military strategy. The Iranians have a different approach. The Iranians are using the military in order to impact the economic, political, and narrative spheres. All right, it's completely reverse. So the military strategy is calibrated in a certain way to benefit the Iranian economy, okay? So what I mean by that is that the military is strategically controlling certain moves so that Chinese ships can pass, right? Because Chinese ships are the main buyer of Iranian oil. Also, if you're willing to play ball like Japan or Qatar or Oman, they will also let your ships pass, okay? So this is being strategic. Politically, the Iranians are trying to split the Gulf states, right? They know that Saudi Arabia and UAE are committed to regime change in Iran, but they know that Qatar, Bahrain, Qatar and Oman are on the other side, okay? So they're trying to gain as much global leverage as possible within the GCC. And the narrative is they're trying to shape global opinion and trying to make everyone believe that they are on the right side of history. And most people believe that. In fact, you have a lot of Americans who are rooting for the Iranians to win. All right? So this is a very different, these are two.
I don't think that's true. We're not rooting for the Iranians to win. We're just like watching our government fumble the ball. You know, we're either going to have a mediated peace negotiation that's going to involve all the great powers and it's going to change the world order, or you're going to go in and you're going to curb stomp Iran and you're going to do a forced regime change and you're going to maintain the empire. Pick one. That's what America wants to see. The waffling is what Americans hate. The indecisiveness, the lack of conviction, the lack of planning, the lack of strategy is what we hate, because we know we're capable of much greater than that, but our government's willfully fucking it up to basically enrich a few oligarchs, and it's really frustrating.
Very different strategies. All right, so let's talk about the advantages and disadvantages of both strategies. Okay, so from the American perspective, the fact that you have this approach of making the world conform to your military strategy basically means that you lack what we call reflection, okay? Meaning that you're not able to sit down with your strategists and discuss how this war is going and how to make changes. But the Iranians are able to do so because the military has to conform to the economic, political, and narrative strategies, okay? Second is flexibility. And what I mean by that is the military strategy, if it's not going well for the Americans, they lack the capacity to reflect and make changes. So what they do is they double down, okay? They accelerate the process of bombing in Iraq, even though it's probably not getting them anywhere. Also, much more importantly, the Americans will choose much more self-destructive, desperate strategies, such as sending ground troops. It is possible by this weekend, ground troops will be sent into Iran, which most military analysts believe to be either countereffective or suicidal, okay? The Iranians, on the other hand, can adapt their military strategy to the economic and political realities. Okay, so for example, what they're doing now is they're charging tolls to cross the Strait of Hormuz. Okay, and the third difference is the idea of resilience. So, in other words, if you make the world and America conform to your military strategy, they won't support you. That means that if you're losing troops and you're losing equipment, it is very hard to replenish, resupply. Whereas the complete opposite in Iran, where because they are winning popular opinion, because their economy is becoming stronger in this process.
Well, it's hard to replenish because our complete system of business in the United States is fucked. Okay, I got to be real on that. Everything is so focused on quarterly profits and executive bonuses and, you know, what can you do for me now, not 10 years from now, that it's bled into our defense structure where we don't have the ability to say, hey, let's produce this and do what's best for the military. No, it's let's do what's best for the defense contractor's bottom line. Where we just now said, hey, defense contractor, I need you to produce 4x what you've been producing. And it's like, why weren't we doing that the whole time? Why weren't we like getting ready? You know, instead, it's all gone to like bullshit vanity projects and corporate money laundering and corruption. And that's why we're floundering right now, because we've had a succession of presidents and administrations and government that doesn't give a fuck about this country. And that's the problem. It doesn't give a fuck about our soldiers. That doesn't give a fuck about our society that's going to Epstein's Island to fuck around. You know, that's the problem we have with this country right now. And now we're caught with our pants down and not ready. You know, we're moving missiles from Korea to the Middle East because we didn't hold our own people accountable. We let the oligarchs just do whatever the hell they wanted because fuck it. You know, it's crazy that we've gotten to this point, but it's been allowed. And unfortunately, no one's tried to stop it. You know, I see a lot of like generational blaming in the US. We're all to blame. Boomers are to blame because they could have probably stopped it early on. Gen X is to blame for not caring. Millennials and Zoomers are to blame for not speaking up loud enough, early enough, and strong enough. Everybody's to blame. You know, and this is where we're at now. And it's like, and he's right too about like being flexible and reflecting and, you know, having the guts to do some things that might not be with popular opinion, maybe bombing the shit out of the Iranians, bombing them into submission, hitting critical infrastructure targets to cause mass destruction. We're trying to win a war, you know, but instead it's like we're trying to win a social media contest. It's absolutely ridiculous. And, you know, for Iran to be able to taunt us unanswered, like, for example, you know, these tankers, oh, you have to pay us $2 million to pass. How are they enforcing that? Why haven't we bombed their tools of enforcement? We destroyed their navy, right? So how else are they doing it? Missile launchers? Why aren't we destroying those? See, that's where I'm wondering. Why are we being forced to lose by our own government?
We need more political allies. They can actually draw on more support from the population, and they can also recruit foreign fighters and foreign support, foreign sympathy for their cause. Okay? So for these reasons, I believe that America is losing this war and that ultimately this war will be lost. When this will happen, we don't know, because America is an empire and they can actually drag us on for at least 20 years. All right? Okay. So now that we've discussed why,
and I'm sure Fink from BlackRock would love that. You know, this is what the oligarchs want, because 20 years at war will lead to domestic slavery. Every time we've gone to war in the past 2 decades, we have lost freedoms in the United States. So this is what they want. They want high oil prices, economic pressure on the public. They want to suppress voting. They basically trying to kill the SAVE Act right now because they want illegals to vote in our elections, and they're going to be able to coerce the political will through the economic pressure created from this conflict. They want to keep us poor so that we can be ruled.
America will probably lose this war. I want to now shift our focus to discuss how the world will change because of this war. What does the end of this war look like? And to do that, what's really important is to go back to our model of how the world works, okay? So remember, last week we discussed the structure of the world. And at the very core is the empire. Because the empire provides the muscle, the military might, to shape the contours of reality, okay? And then with the empire, you have the finance, okay? Finance includes City of London, Wall Street, Bank of International Settlements, and asset managers. And they are the game masters, okay? Okay, the empire is the muscle, but the finance are the ones who actually set the game. And then this creates the global economy, which is based on the US dollar, right? But you can't actually have people believing that this is the way the game is structured, because then people won't want to play the game. So what you do is you create an additional layer of multilateral organizations, what the Americans like to call the rules-based international order, including the UN and the WTO, okay, and other organizations. But this makes people believe that the way the world is structured is fair, open, and transparent. And you hide the finance and the empire behind multilateral organizations, okay? And then to justify this system, you have the culture, education, and media, which then creates the different legal infrastructure of different nations and the values as well. Okay? So this is how the world is organized. We also discuss how there are these organizations that are above the nation state, that are above the system in order to benefit from the system, to keep it going, but also to extract rent from it. And these include intelligence, crime, and science. We also discuss how the organizing forces behind intelligence, crime, and science are transnational capital, secret societies, as well as elite families. And we discuss how they are bound together by a concept called the occult, which we'll study later on, okay? But the idea of the occult, okay? So this is the structure of the world. Now, once this world is created, what you need to understand is that the people in different spheres who benefit from the system, first and foremost, their interest is maintaining that status quo, okay?
And what's crazy here is that some of this would be unbelievable today if not for the Epstein files confirming this structure. The Epstein files, it's easy to kind of like talk about the layers, the game master, the dollar, the multilateral international institutions, the culture wars, legal framework, all that. Any sociology or political science professor will talk about that. And then, to a certain extent, you could talk about how the intelligence community, criminal syndicates, and institutions, right, shape a lot of this. And sometimes they collaborate and sometimes they compete and so forth. But to kind of say behind them stands transnational capital and secret organizations and elite families, and that they're all part of this occult group. That's kind of like depending on who you're talking to, hard to justify here and there. But now we know in the modern time that all of this is true. We know that those three categories attend the Bohemian Grove. Somebody released the guest list a couple weeks ago. We know that MK Ultra was real. We know that Jeffrey Epstein ran a child pedophile cult out of his island and used it as a blackmail intelligence operation and as a node for conducting behind the scenes business. We know that all of these wealthy people were part of the Navixim sex cult and so forth. And we basically have seen that there's a man behind the curtain at this point, and it's grim. It's borderline satanic. There's a lot of things in there that raise serious ethical questions. And it's fair to say at this point that it is a cult. You had a lot of Catholic priests come forward on different podcasts in recent weeks saying as much, saying that the Pope is convening a multi-faith convention for exorcism that crosses religious lines from Catholicism to Protestantism to Islam to Judaism to talk about their concerns about elite occultism. So you're having credible organizations and people throughout the world finally acknowledge that what Professor Yang just asserted is in fact real. Be something that's going to be very difficult for a lot of people to wrap their head around and understand, because it robs you of agency. It says that you're not necessarily completely in control of your own reality, that there is this external group of villains in this story of our lives, and they're really fucking evil. And if we don't do something about them, they're going to try to enslave us. It's just a fact. And a lot of people are like, oh my God, like, how can you just agree with these people? Well, because the evidence is there. It's all in the Epstein files. If you've been reading the files and keeping track of everything that's been going on, this is the natural conclusion, that you have all of these people in positions of power and wealth that practice some kind of, whether it be a satanic ritual or some kind of like pagan ritual, whatever it may be. They're doing something because it believes it gains them power, even if it's all bullshit. Like, let's just pick one out of the hat. Okay, you got a bunch of elite doing Canaanite rituals because they believe it gains them power and it makes them feel like they're in a club, like it's Eyes Wide Shut. Even if it's all bullshit and fantasy, RPG, Dungeons and Dragons crap, and none of it has any foundation in empirical reality, the bottom line is these wealthy, powerful people believe it's true, and they're exacting their fantastical delusions upon all of us to our detriment. So that's why we have to respond to it. It doesn't matter if the occultism is in fact real or not. These people in power believe that it's real. They've had a break with reality. They're delusional, and they're imposing their psychopathy upon the populace at large. So they're a threat to us all.
So their interest is in maintaining the status quo. All right? So basically, they want the system to continue. The problem with the system is, at the core, is an empire that will probably lose the war in Iran. And this creates a problem because if the empire falls, then it's possible that this entire edifice falls as well. So the only solution is to replace the empire, the American empire, with another empire, all right? That is able to provide the muscle for this system. And this empire, I've argued in the past, is of course Israel. And this is what we call Pax Judaica. Okay? So, on the surface, it seems like this war is one between the United States and Iran. But in reality, what this war really is about is a war between the United States and Israel, where the American empire has become corrupt, incompetent, and arrogant. And so now Israel sees an opportunity to replace the American empire in the system. And it's something that eventually every aspect of the system will agree to do.
Look, I'm not sure if that's going to be reality, but I see his point. Professor Yang has argued in the past that a lot of empires come from resource depleted, military inferior microstates, and that goes way back in time to like Kievan Rus, the Qin dynasty, right? Germany started off as Prussia. There's a lot of examples. England, it was like this like small piece in southern England, Wessex, right? That's how it started. They all start off as small and militarily inferior states, and the threat around them of greater enemies causes them to be resourceful and creative to the point where they become larger empires. But it could take several decades to achieve this. But that's what he's asserting here. So to, I think, dismiss this at face value, it's easy to do, but it's not to say that it's not entirely possible that this could eventually happen. My argument is that the goal here is to make Israel the regional hegemon. I don't know about it being a global empire, but definitely the regional hegemon, having it absorb Syria, having it absorb Iraq, maybe having it absorb Saudi Arabia and Lebanon. The weakness is there in all of those governments to absorb them into a stronger society. But it's going to take a lot to get there. This war may do it. This war may intensify to the point where it destroys that entire region of Mesopotamia. And then it evolves into greater Israel from there. That may be the case. But a lot of steps need to happen still to get to that point. But he's not wrong in saying that it's a possibility. It's absolutely a possibility.
All right? So the main outcome of this war, when it ends, is that Israel will replace America in the Middle East. Okay? All right. So let me first discuss why the American empire is falling. Okay? And the main reason is the idea of something called the military industrial complex. So, for most of its history, America did not have a professional army. Why? Because the founding fathers and most American citizens believed that if there's a standing army, if there's a professional army, that's a direct threat to the liberty of the Americans, okay? Because the Americans fought a war, the Revolutionary War, to get rid of the professional army that was the British. Okay, so Americans do not like a professional army. But in order to fight World War I and World War II, they didn't have a choice but to create a standing army. The problem is that after America won World War II, the apparatus stayed. And the apparatus wanted to maintain the status quo, meaning they wanted access to unlimited government funds. So this led to the Cold War, and the Cold War was a justification for the MIC, the military industrial complex, to get as much government funding as possible. And the blue, as you can see, is government expenditures. Okay, we can understand why they spent all this money in World War II, because they were fighting a war to save America and to save the world. But as you can see, even though it dropped drastically at the end of the war, starting with the Cold War, you have this uptick, okay? And then you have the Vietnam War. And then after America won the Cold War, you saw this massive uptick. And this is something called the War on Terror. So the military industrial complex is always looking to start wars in order to justify its existence. So there's a very famous journalist named Julian Assange, and he said this about America. The point is not to have successful wars. The point is not to win wars. The point is to have never-ending wars, which allows the military-industrial complex to transfer American taxpayer money to a transnational elite. Okay? It's basically, the point of wars is for the military-industrial complex to steal as much money as possible from America. Okay? America spends a lot of money in its military.
God, he's not wrong about that.
America accounts for 41% of all global military spending. Who's next? China. China spends 8.2%. Russia, which is America's main military enemy, only spends 4.1%. Okay? Meaning that Russia spends 1/10 the amount of money that America spends. And you think that, okay, well, all this means is that America is invincible. But what people don't recognize is the level of corruption within the American military. The American military is probably the most corrupt institution in the world, by far. No one even comes close, okay? September 10th, 2001, Donald Rumsfeld, who's the Secretary of Defense for the Americans, he's head of the Pentagon, and this is a day before September 11th, the 9/11 attacks. He said that, he had a press conference and he said that, look, we've looked at the Pentagon books, okay? We're trying to do an accounting of the Pentagon military spending, and we can't find $2 trillion. There's $2 trillion missing from the budget. It went somewhere, we don't know where, but it went somewhere, okay? All right, so this is so where does the money go? It goes to private contractors, okay? These are all private companies that make a lot of money off the government, okay? So listen at the Boeing company. They had in 1 year $20 billion from the government. They got $20 billion in contracts from the government, okay? To do so, they had to spend $16 million in order to lobby Congress through advertisements, through political campaigns. And then they bribe, this is a bribe to politicians. They spent $2 million, okay? So this is a really good business to be in. You spend $2 million, you give them bribes to politicians, then you spend $16 million on campaigns, and then you make $20 billion, okay? This is extremely profitable. The difference, of course, is being picked up by the American taxpayer. The Boeing company is not just a defense contractor, but also makes civilian airplanes. And for these past few years, there's been quite a few cases of civilian airplanes falling out of the sky made by Boeing. Okay, so for example, the Boeing 737 MAX. Okay, there was a recall because there were some engineering issues with the plane. Now, there have been a couple of whistleblowers who've come out and tried to say that Boeing is a very corrupt company. And for a reason, they died, okay? They just disappeared. We don't know why, but when they were about to testify against Boeing, they somehow died, all right? This is a really interesting story that shows you the level of corruption in the Pentagon. There is this woman who's a contractor for the Army, and she stole $103 million. Okay? That's a lot of money, $103 million. She stole it. The Army didn't know, and she kept on stealing, and no one seemed to care in the Army.
Office space.
But then the IRS, this is the Internal Revenue Service, they recognized that she was getting all this money from somewhere, so they investigated her and recognized, oh my God, she's stealing from the Army. So the IRS told the Army, and that's when the Army recognized, oh, we have a problem, okay? The fact that the Army didn't notice that she was stealing $103 million tells you, actually, theft in the military is probably a very common thing, all right? So ultimately, what this means is that this corruption in the Pentagon is not really sustainable, okay? So let me discuss why this is a problem for America in Iran, okay? So right now America is facing three major issues with this war in Iran. The first major issue is the lack of political will, meaning that this war is very unpopular in America. Only 40% of the population currently support this war, and as things go on and on, support will probably decrease, okay? You need political will because you need Americans to pay for this war. Trump has asked for $200 billion to fund this war, and also it's possible that Trump will call the national draft, which I believe will happen.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, so if Americans don't want to support this war, it's very hard to get them to pay for this war and to go fight this war. Second problem is lack of manufacturing capacity. So in other words, what this means is that if you lose planes, if you use too many bombs, you cannot replenish it because you don't have the factories to produce these planes and bombs.
It's not that we don't have the factories, we don't have the employment to produce these in a quick manner because all these companies have been so focused on corporate profits and executive bonuses that they've laid off the army of employees that are going to be needed to create the armaments. It's insane.
Enough, okay? And so if this war drags on too long, then America will just run out of bombs. And the third problem for America is unwillingness to sustain casualties. Okay? And what this means is that the American military is afraid of reporting deaths, casualties, which is weird because in a war, soldiers die. That's just the reality of war. But the Pentagon is afraid of reporting too many deaths because of the fair political backlash. Okay? So these are three major problems for the American military in Iran. These are the three major constraints. All right? So the Americans can't actually resolve these issues. America will probably lose this war, in which case this gives opportunity for Israel to prove to the world that it should be the empire, okay? And it proves it can be the empire by showing that it does have the political will, it doesn't have the manufacturing capacity, but that's Mossad, okay? And it is much more strategic. The last thing is that it is resilient, meaning that it is willing to accept casualties, okay? So basically, the idea here is the global elite, they need an empire to provide the muscle, but the empire must prove that it can serve the needs of the global elite, okay? And so an empire must prove three things. First of all, it must prove unity. It must prove it has the resources and the capacity, basically the capacity, okay? And it must prove determination.
He said that the empire must prove that it can serve the will of the global elite. I mean, that in itself is the core problem. The global elite are the ones that actually need to be exterminated to make all of this chaos stop. Like, if people just woke up and said, hey, I don't want to serve a master who's not God anymore, and I'm willing to like just eliminate these people, it would be solved. But humanity lives in tribes, and we want to have a boss, and that weakness makes us susceptible to this very idea. It's the failure of the human condition.
This is called the F-35. The F-35 is the most advanced fighter jet in the whole world. It has stealth technology, meaning you can't actually lock onto it using radar. This cost $100 million each. Took 26 years to develop. So you would think, wow, it took 26 years, so this must be really, really good. No, it took 26 years because the MIC is really corrupt and they want to steal as much money as possible. Okay? And in this war, the Iranians have already shot down at least one of these jets. Okay? This is not supposed to happen. You're not supposed to be able to shoot these things down. But Iranians have shot it down using very low radar. Again, these things, they're not designed to win wars. They're designed to steal as much money as possible from the American taxpayer. Okay? Now, last example is the Gerald Ford. This ship cost $13 billion. It costs $13 billion. The annual defense budget for the Iranians is $10 billion. It goes into the war theater, and 3 weeks afterwards, it has to run away, okay? And in fact, the Americans say, oh, the Gerald Ford, this is the most advanced supercarrier in the world. It's probably going to be down for repairs in the next 2 years. And there's argument as to what happened, okay? There are three different possibilities. The first possibility is that there was an accident in the laundry room, and there's a fire, and this fire spread throughout the carrier, okay? Which means that actually the carrier is not very resilient. Okay, so that's one possibility. And that's what the official story is. But there are also others who say like the Iranians hit the ship with a missile. And so the Gerald Ford can't protect itself from Iranian missiles, so it ran away. Okay? The third possibility, the third explanation is the Pentagon recognized that there are severe limitations of the Gerald Ford in actual combat operations. Its radar, its guidance system are all very limited. So the Pentagon withdrew the Gerald Ford because it was absolutely useless in war. Right? Whichever story is true, it doesn't paint a good picture of the American military. $13 billion. And this does nothing. Okay? It's just a white elephant.
I've heard a couple different stories about the Gerald Ford. I've heard that the sewage system failed even before the conflict began. Some soldiers are alleging because the Biden administration made alterations to the Gerald Ford to make it DEI compliant, which means that they wanted LGBTQ restrooms, and those retrofits created plumbing issues that created a sanitation issue that started before they even got there. Then there's a rumor that some of the naval crew didn't want to be there and basically started a fire so that they could have an excuse to leave. And, you know, that's what happens when morale is low in your military, when, you know, a lot of people are like, this isn't Operation Epic Fury. This is Operation Epstein Fury. And that just reinforces my point that the American people don't want to fight a war for fucking pedophiles. So, knowing that, I wouldn't be surprised. And frankly, I wouldn't blame them if the soldiers set that fire to get that courier to go home. It's not the smartest thing to do, but I wouldn't be surprised if that happened because people are so disgusted with what's been going on.
In 2024, there was the famous Lebanon pager attack, okay? Meaning that the Israelis were able to implant bombs into pagers that went to Hezbollah members. And then it blew up, okay? And maybe from a military perspective, it didn't accomplish that much. From a psychological perspective, it accomplished a lot, okay? It scared the living hell out of Hezbollah. It made them paranoid, and also made the world respect Israel more. And Israel spent $275 million to conduct this operation. That took decades to implement, okay? And you're like, okay, why is Israel telling us this? Because again, Israel is auditioning to be the new empire. It's telling the global elite, look, not only will we fight this war for you, not only will we be your muscle, but we'll do it cheaply, man. Not billions of dollars, millions of dollars. This is ISIS. ISIS, Islamic State, okay? And this is considered a terrorist organization. These Sunni extremists who go around and beheading people, all right? Now, this is from the New York Times, and the yellow tells you areas in which they operate. And as you can see, it's really across the Middle East. And the red are incidents of attacks directed by ISIS, okay? Now, something that's really funny about all this is ISIS attacks everywhere in the Middle East except for one country, and that country is Israel. Okay? Really funny how you have these Muslim extremists going around committing all sorts of atrocities everywhere in the Middle East except Israel. And so that's why a lot of people believe that Islamic State is actually a creation of Mossad. But again, Israel is
I agree with that. I think the Islamic State is not only the Mossad, but also the CIA. I think it's just a bunch of random fringe Islamist groups that, want to do. It's just like a kid that wants to, blow up the Boston Marathon, and he starts talking to the FBI agent who teaches him how to make the pipe bomb. It's the same thing. They go online, they find their intelligence rabbi who literally or figuratively, right? And I think that it's all a bunch of bullshit. I think that they're all just random Islamist militias. And the American media was like, oh, ISIS sounds sexy and, sounds like a good storyline villain. We'll just come up with this bullshit concept for a bunch of random militias that have no connection with each other. Same with like the Haqqani network and all these other like fabricated enemies and ghost enemies that aren't real. It's just like he said, designed to keep the money flowing through the DoD to enrich a certain faction of people in the United States.
Happy for the world to know this, because again, Israel is auditioning to be the new empire. And what Israel is saying is, we don't have to use the American strategy of just bombing everyone to death, okay? That's expensive, that's brutal, and it's not very strategic. We can use Mossad to infiltrate groups and use these groups against their comrades, their neighbors. Is that much more efficient? Is that much more effective? Okay? So what Israel is saying is, we are much better at controlling the Middle East than the Americans. So let us control the Middle East using our strategies. The problem with an empire as it grows old is it doesn't want to do bad things. Okay? It wants to feel good about itself. Therefore, it subcontracts the violence, the murder, the genocide to different people, okay? To mercenaries, the Israelis in the Middle East. And this is a pattern throughout human history. So the Romans started out as mercenaries for the Etruscans in Italy. The Aztecs started out as mercenaries for the Colchican in Mexico. The Greeks started out as mercenaries for the Persians, okay? The Mongols started out as mercenaries for the Chinese. The Akkadians started out as mercenaries for the Sumerians. The Mamluks started out as mercenaries for the Ayyubid dynasty in Egypt. In every instance, what happened is the mercenaries eventually got to a point where we are the ones killing ourselves for this empire. The empire is corrupt, decadent, and weak. Why don't we just take it over? And they did, okay? We're seeing a similar situation play out today in the Middle East, where Israel was created by the British and Americans to be their pit bull, to be their aircraft carrier in the Middle East, to create as much instability as possible so that the Americans and the British could control the oil supply in the Middle East. And this has gone on for decades. And now the Israelis are like, wait a minute here. We're the ones doing all the work. We're the ones making all the sacrifices. We're the ones that are getting all the hate in this world. So why shouldn't we be the empire now? America's useless. Okay? All right, so this is a pattern throughout human history. And so we're going to look at what this means. Okay? So Israel has something called the Greater Israel Project. And this is what extremists in Israel believe. They believe that God in the Bible promised the entire Middle East to the Jewish people, okay? Extending from the Nile in Egypt all the way to the Euphrates in Iraq, okay? And it also encompasses Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, and parts of Turkey as well, okay? Now, something really funny about this map is this. Iran, Persia, is not part of the Greater Israel Project. So then you're asking yourself, wait a minute here. If Iran is actually not part of the Greater Israel Project, then why is Israel going to war with Iran? Well, the reason why is, if they want all this territory, their main enemy is not Syria, that's been destroyed. It's not Iraq, that's been destroyed. It's not Saudi Arabia, it's too weak. Not Jordan, it's too weak. Not Egypt, it's too weak. Not Lebanon, it's too weak, okay? Their main enemy is the American Empire, okay? In the Greater Israel Project, it's the Americans that control the land of Greater Israel, the Middle East. These are American bases. So in other words, you use this war against Iran to destroy the American Empire. How? By forcing the American Empire to go and invade Iran. And when this happens, America will be too overextended, and then they'll be forced to retreat from the Middle East. The Israelis don't really care if Iran is still standing. They want Iran to be as weakened as possible, okay? But they really don't need to defeat Iran to achieve the biblical prophecy. But they do need to defeat the Americans, all right? The Americans are in the way. All right, okay, so what does the Greater Israel Project mean? Well, it means control of the world's oil, basically, 20% of the world's oil. So these are the gas fields. The yellow are the gas fields of the Middle East, all right? And the blue are the trade routes. So you can see how Israel is at the very center of all this wealth, right? They have the logistics, They have the technology. It makes sense for them to take control of all these resources and then start shipping these resources to Europe as well as to East Asia, China, South Korea, and Japan. Okay? So that's what the Pax Judaica will look like. It will be a trade network controlling all the resources of the Middle East and then shipping it off to the rest of the world. What does Pax Judaica look like? It's really the India Middle East trade corridor, okay? All right, so look at this map where for India to get to Europe, it has to go through Israel, okay? So this is what Pax Judaica will look like. Basically the IMAC trade corridor that will unite the South Asian continent with Europe, okay? But not only that, but the idea of this is also to connect to Africa, right? Because no other place is able to access Africa, only Israel is. And not only that, but it's also able to access Ukraine and Russia. So the idea is to take Russian and Ukraine energy and food and then transport it into Africa. That's combining the world. Okay? So Israel, because of its location, can really be the epicenter of all global trade. All right. Now, let's look at...
And what's crazy about this, it's called a hypothesis that Professor Yang's putting forward, is that this kind of like realigns Jerusalem's traditional global position, because that's how Jerusalem became a major epicenter of religion. It started off with it being a major trade epicenter for access to Europe from Africa and Asia, and it's basically reasserting itself back into that position for the future, if this hypothesis is in fact true.
Of geopolitics, okay? And once you understand these rules, it'll be much easier for you to understand the new world that we're going into. The first is this: the strong respect each other and prey on the weak, okay? This makes sense, right? Why are the strong fighting each other? Wouldn't it be easier for them to leave each other alone and go pick on the weak? It benefits everyone, right? So in this situation, right, you have different countries. You have GCC, you have Israel, you have the United States, you have Iran, okay? So you have these 4 different players in this war. Right now, it's essentially Israel, GCC, and US fighting against Iran. But if Iran proves it is strong, and Israel proves it's strong, and GCC proves it's weak, the US proves it's weak, guess what's going to happen? Israel and Iran are going to get together and say, screw these guys. Let's just work together, man. Okay, does that make sense? Even though in the beginning, it seems as though Israel, GCC, and the US are allies against Iran, ultimately, if Iran is able to prove it's strong, then Israel will abandon the GCC and the United States. And Israel will work with Iran to build a new order in the Middle East. Because that's the law of the jungle. Okay? That is what is in the best interest, according to game theory, for Israel. And the last thing to understand is the weak do not work well together. The weak must ally with the strong for protection, okay? So what this means is that GCC is weak, right? So you look at Saudi Arabia, UAE, Bahrain, Oman, Kuwait, Qatar, okay? So these are the 6 GCC countries. They're all weak. And you would think, you know what? If they were to combine their resources and fight together, they could probably beat Israel or probably beat Iran. The problem with this is weak players don't work well together. Okay? They're weak because they're stupid. And so what they do is, rather than seek to work together, what they do is they seek to ally with stronger forces, okay?
And the Gulf states are not strong enough to defeat Israel. They don't have the military history, the cultural unity, the political will. They're just basically a bunch of kingly vassal states that are managing refineries effectively, and they don't have like a strong military history like Israel has created for itself that give it a sense of purpose and I would call it like military dignity and military strength. They don't have the will for victory.
So right now they're all aligned with the United States and Israel, all right, against Iran. But as this war progresses and the US falls, then what will happen is that they must either choose Israel or Iran. And what's going to happen is that you might have some places, Qatar and Oman, who choose, you know what, screw this, we're going to join Iran. And you have Saudi Arabia and UAE who are like, okay, let's join Israel. Okay? But the GCC, regardless of what happens, will no longer be a major geopolitical factor in the Middle East anymore.
He's probably right about that, because it's hard to see like large Sunni states, especially Saudi Arabia, allying with Iran or becoming dependent on Iran, while Qatar, Bahrain, to a certain lesser extent, Oman, that have large Shia populations, Yemen, they may be more subject to Iranian influence, but they're not going to go easy. Qatar and Bahrain are the most likely to defect out of this entire group, especially Qatar.
A lot of them will be destroyed because of this war. All right? So, according to game theory, this is what the world should look like after the war ends. But again, this is all theory. Okay? This is a class focused on intellectual speculation. It's meant to be fun. It's meant to make us more curious about the world. It's supposed to heighten our critical thinking skills.
Psychohistory.
This is not meant to be prophecy, okay? I'm not saying this must happen. I'm saying this might happen for these reasons. And if they do happen if they do happen, then this provides us a good framework to understand our reasoning better, okay? If it doesn't work out this way, it's fine, because we'll just go back and analyze what went wrong better, okay? What's really important is not to set a judgment. What's really important is keep our minds open and be open to the possibility of different outcomes.
This is why I like Professor Yang. He's rational. He's like, hey, if U.S. military policy maintains its current disastrous direction, this is the likely outcome. And he's right. If Trump doesn't get off his ass and become a wartime president, then yes, this is what's going to happen. He's right about that. Unfortunately, like, Trump needs to decide. He needs to commit to what his legacy is going to be. And if that's going to be the end of America, then he keeps doing what he's doing. If he wants American empire to last another 30, 40 years, he's got to destroy Iran decisively right now and make sure that this scenario doesn't happen.
All right? Remember, you need an empire. You need an empire, okay? Then you have the finance, the game masters. And then you have the global economy. Okay, all right. So these different players. And again, there's a really important idea to understand. All these players are interested in maintaining the status quo. Eventually, as this war progresses, they're going to recognize that America is actually a problem. The American empire is not a good thing. It's not a benefit to us. It's a problem for us. And so we need to replace the American empire, right? And
they've already decided that. That's been decided for years. They're not selling us out to China. They're not trying to get us destroyed in the Middle East. They're not trying to plunder us and move our money into the European Union or move it into whatever third world project they're doing. They're trying to destroy us with Iran. That's been a known commodity for at least 20 years.
Who's the only alternative? Israel. So we need to transition from America to Israel if we are to maintain the system. Then they'll recognize that, okay, the problem though is America will not go away. Empires don't surrender power willingly. And so we need to create a situation in which America is forced out of the Middle East. Now, Iran cannot defeat America on the battlefield. America can drag this thing on for at least 20 years. But we don't want to wait 20 years because we'll lose a lot of money in the process. And there's no point in waiting 20 years. So we need to force America out of the Middle East. So if we cannot defeat America, if Iran cannot defeat America on the battlefield, what we need to do is cause America to implode. We need to cause a collapse in America. And how do you do that? The economy. If I crash the stock market, if I cause oil to go way up, if I cause a discontent in America, this will cause a civil war in America. And then the American military has no choice but to retreat back into America. Okay? And then Israel will naturally take over from America. And this is something we'll discuss next class, okay? The strategy for how to destroy the American empire and replace it with Israel. All right? Okay, does that make sense? Okay, any more questions, guys? Okay, great. So I will see you next week, okay?
And he's right about that. Look at the debt. Look at the woke politics, the culture wars. They've been setting us up since 9/11 for our own self-destruction. They've destroyed God in this country. They've destroyed the family. They've destroyed relationships. They've destroyed the economy. They've destroyed the job market. They've destroyed morality. They've destroyed ethics. Everything. They've just worked on dividing and conquering for this moment. So that they could crucify us on the cross of Middle Eastern conflicts. I'm telling you, the best thing Trump can do is either annihilate Iran or do some kind of scorched earth policy where, instead of invading Iran, we just like completely blow it up and leave them in a state of absolute devastation. Where this really could have been salvaged, where we could have had a way to stop this nightmare scenario from happening, had they made arrests associated with the Epstein files, had they arrested the billionaires, had they prosecuted these corporations, had they stopped the bank bailouts, had they brought justice to all these people, prosecuted all the people stealing money for the Medicaid programs. If they actually enacted justice on all these wrongs, the American people would have faith. But because they're doing nothing, because they're protecting the criminals, they're protecting the pedophiles, they're protecting the foreign thieves, nobody has any faith in the system anymore. And they're willing to let it collapse. They're willing to play into this agenda, unfortunately. So this is where we're at. And I don't have the faith in the government to make the right decisions anymore. I'm just kind of waiting to see how it plays out and, hoping the hand of God intervenes.